OTAs haven't even started yet, and the regular season is more than 100 days away, but that doesn't mean that it's not too early to have some predictions for the upcoming season. I'm going to be dishing out game-by-game predictions for the Seahawks here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A special thanks, as always, to all the 12s that are tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week, whether you're tuning in from Las Vegas, Nevada, or you're overseas in Helsinki, Finland. We appreciate each and every one of you. The NFL schedule came out yesterday, so I'm going to be taking a look at every single one of Seattle's 17 games and making a way too early prediction on each and every one of these contests, including the 4 primetime games, 3 road games against NFC West opponents in the last 8 weeks. Should be an absolute blast. Going to be diving into every single one of those games. And this episode is brought your way by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Now for your lead story here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Yesterday was the unofficial holiday that is the NFL schedule reveal day. We knew most of the Seahawks games leading up to that 5 p.m. Pacific time reveal. And as expected, the Seahawks are going to open the year with the Denver Broncos at home. Second time in 3 years that's been the case at Lumen Field. 6 of the first 9 games at home. We are more than 100 days away from that matchup against the Denver Broncos. OTAs don't even start till next week, so we got a while, and yet anyone that pays attention to the NFL calendar knows that when you blink, the regular season shows up. It's going to be here before you know it. So keeping that in mind, with the draft in the rearview mirror, free agency long finished, teams pretty much are what they are going to be. There might be a few trades in training camp, but teams basically are what we expect them to be at this stage of the offseason. So I think it is definitely a good time to start digging into the games and maybe making some predictions here. So without further ado, let's get to the season opener against the Denver Broncos. And this is not going to be the same fanfare a couple years. Wilson was coming back to Seattle. In fact, the Denver Broncos, who knows, is going to be playing quarterback for them. They traded for Zach Wilson, who had a really rough go with the New York Jets as a former top 10 pick. They have him, they have Jared Stidham, and they have first-round pick Bo Nix coming from Oregon, who they selected 12th overall. Who knows which one of those 3 is going to be starting against the Seattle Seahawks. If I had to make my prediction right now, though, I expect Bo Nix being a 5-year starter at the college level. Sean Payton loved him. That's why they picked him at number 12. I expect that Bo Nix is going to be the one that's under center for that season opener. And keeping that in mind, when you look at the season opener every year, wild things tend to happen. Seattle will be favored going into this game with Geno Smith under center and the talent they have on both sides of the football. Denver is in rebuild mode, but week 1, we've seen crazy things happen. The Broncos were supposed to win a couple years ago, and the Seahawks beat Russell Wilson in his return. I expect, given the fact that Denver's got the quarterback uncertainty, Seattle's going to be breaking in 2 new schemes on offense and defense. I anticipate that this is going to be a game full of mistakes like we normally see in week 1. But I think the difference maker is who is playing quarterback. I do think Bo Nix with Sean Payton, that could be a really solid pairing. But I've got the Seahawks with another really close home win over the Broncos in week 1, similar fashion to the game a couple of years ago in the sense that I don't expect a bunch of touchdowns. There's not going to be a lot of offensive fireworks, but I think that the Seahawks get the win to go to 1-0. In week 2, the New England Patriots hosting the Seahawks. I expect the Patriots are going to be one of the weaker teams in the AFC. Drake May will start at some point this year, but I anticipate Jacoby Brissett is going to be the guy in week 2. May is more unpolished, only had 2 years as a starter at UNC. So I think they're going to want to have him learn on the sidelines for a while before they give him the reins running the offense in New England. Brissett is a capable signal caller, and this is a long road trip for the Seahawks. I could see this game being much closer than a lot of people anticipate, and Brissett is a player that can move the football through the air. He's got some mobility as well. New England just doesn't have a lot of weapons around him, so I don't think for 4 quarters they're going to be able to hold off the Seahawks. But I think this will be a close game for a while. In fact, I think New England could even have the lead at halftime in this game. But I'm going to go 26-17 for the Seahawks. I just think that Ken Walker III is going to get going on the ground. Geno Smith's going to throw a couple touchdowns. I just don't think New England has enough talent for 4 quarters, even at home. With this matchup being a 10 a.m. Pacific time start, I think the Seahawks are still going to be able to get the job done. So 2-0 going into week 3. This is one of my 5 most anticipated games on the schedule. The Miami Dolphins, Tua Tagovailoa. They've got Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, added Odell Beckham Jr. They've got a number of weapons at the running back position. Defensively, there's some really solid players. This is a team that could be in the hunt to try to unseat the Kansas City Chiefs this year as the AFC representative in the Super Bowl. I think Seattle can give them a really good game, especially since they have home field advantage. They're coming off 2 wins to start the season. And I think Seattle's got enough offensive fireworks to be able to hang with them back and forth in the game that should have quite a few points. But Miami's just got a little bit more talent, and I think Seattle's going to have some issues early in the season, learning a new defense. There's going to be some coverage breakdowns, and against a team like Miami, you can't afford that to happen. I just think there's going to be enough big plays in this game that the Miami Dolphins are going to escape Lumen Field with a 31-27 win. I expect this to be a close game. I think these are 2 teams that are pretty evenly matched in a lot of regards. But I think Miami is just slightly more talented, and I'm looking forward to seeing Mike Macdonald against Mike McDaniel in the coaching battle of young gurus on offense and defense. I think Miami takes this one. Going to week 4, another game that I've got circled, and Geno Smith's probably got this game circled because he has loved playing at Ford Field. The last 2 years, the Seahawks have beat the Lions in track meets. There was very little defense, though there were a couple pick sixes in those games by the Seahawks. So they did score some points on defense, also gave up a ton of points on defense, and they managed to win both those games, scoring a ton of points, and they had to. Geno Smith, 4 touchdowns in those 2 games. They've gotten good rushing output as well. Detroit, as they should be, is viewed as one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the NFC. They made the NFC title game last year, and they had the 49ers beat only to give up that game and choke in the second half. But this is a Detroit team that's got a lot of talent. They added some more good players to the mix. I don't think they're going anywhere. With that said, there's just something about Ford Field and that magic with Geno Smith, and we've got a different coaching staff with a different defense. I'm wondering if that could end up actually being the difference maker in this one. And I've got the Seahawks getting the primetime win 3 in a row, at Ford Field, 37-31. So I'm thinking a lot of points again, maybe not as many as we saw 2 years ago when it felt like both teams were unstoppable in offense. But I think the Seahawks are going to have enough fireworks on the road in prime time to move to 3-1 on the season. A really solid start. In week 5, this is a game that I have down on my list as a potential trap game. The New York Giants, I don't expect them to be in the playoff hunt very long into the season, especially in the division they're in. Who knows who the quarterback's going to be? I know some Seahawks fans are hoping Drew Lock gets the start, so it's Geno Smith versus Drew Lock. But I still think it's going to be Daniel Jones coming off that torn ACL. He's going to be healthy. They're going to have him as the starter. Now, does he last till week 5? We'll have to wait and see. But in this prediction, he is in the lineup. The Seahawks had a field day getting after him last year, rushing the passer, 11 sacks in that game. I don't see them equaling that, but I think getting half of that is going to be more than enough in a game where the Giants just don't have enough offense. And I feel like the Seahawks are going to be able to move the ball through the air and on the ground. In second half, they'll get some wiggle room. Game might be a little tighter on the scoreboard than anticipated, but I think the Seahawks win this one 23-13 to move to 4-1. This would be an ideal start in the Mike Macdonald era. And to wrap up the first third of the games on Seattle's schedule, prime time, Thursday night football, San Francisco 49ers. That has been a nightmare the last 2 years. San Francisco has come in and rattled off touchdown after touchdown early to just throw the Seahawks out of the game in the first half. And they haven't been able to make comebacks in the second half. It's just been very one-sided. I think the Seahawks are going to be able to give them a much better game this time around, especially with the new coaching staff. I think Mike Macdonald, by week 6, you're going to start seeing that defense really start to come together a little bit. But I just think San Francisco on paper is still the more talented team. So I have them with a narrow 27-20 victory over the Seahawks, who start the season the first 6 games at 4-2. I think if they got to that point in the actual season, I think Mike Macdonald would be happy. But certainly Seahawks fans want to see that skid against the 49ers, and it's been a while since they won against their division rivals. I see it extended in week 6. I just don't know that the Seahawks are quite there yet to be able to beat the San Francisco 49ers. I'm going to continue my way too early game-by-game predictions coming up next, starting in week 7. Going to be looking at the next 6 weeks, including their bye week. We'll be getting to that here in a moment on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Game Time. You shouldn't have to think about skipping a mortgage payment when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Back in March, I purchased NCAA tournament tickets for the first and second round for my mother and I in Indianapolis. We got passes for the entire weekend for under $400 a piece to watch 6 games via Game Time. We had an absolute blast watching Zach Edey and company dominate the competition. And thanks to Game Time's best price guarantee, it didn't cost an arm and a leg for an awesome experience. Game Time has all kinds of deals on tickets right up to the day of the event, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the very best price to write your own memories. If you find tickets in the same section row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. You're listening to the Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to all the 12s that are tuning in, and thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for your everyday sports needs with the biggest stories and none of the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Taking a way too early prediction, game-by-game look at the Seahawks schedule going into week 7, and I think Seahawks fans would be very happy if this is how this plays out. I have the Seahawks starting off 4-2, including a primetime win over the Detroit Lions at Ford Field. 4-2, right at the top of the NFC West. Unfortunately, did lose to the 49ers in their Thursday night matchup in week 6. They'll be looking to right the ship in week 7, and this is going to be an interesting game. And unfortunately for me, it's one that when I was putting together these predictions, that you always find a game or two where this happens, at least a game or two, where weird things happen, and this has been part of the Seahawks throughout the Pete Carroll era. I think there's going to be a little carryover because it's the Seahawks, but this has been an issue year in, year out, and I think a lot of teams deal with this. They're just games that you play against a team that just isn't a good matchup, and then you have to make a long trip to play them, and the Atlanta Falcons check off those boxes for me. I look at Kirk Cousins going to Atlanta. I think he's a very underrated quarterback, not an elite QB, but he's a very good one. You put him with Kyle Pitts, Drake London. He's got Bijan Robinson behind him in the backfield. I just think the Falcons have a lot of weapons. It's a long trip. I think there could be a little bit of a hangover from that 49ers game where the Seahawks came up just short. So I actually have them losing this game, 24-20 in Atlanta. I just think that the weapons the Falcons have, I would worry about Kyle Pitts now that he's got a quarterback that can consistently get him the football. Same thing with Drake London. And we know the Seahawks run defense issues. I don't expect it to be as bad with Mike Macdonald as the coach, but still, Bijan Robinson, he's the guy. He is an absolute stud. And so I think Atlanta, it's a game that's going to be close, but I think the Falcons actually are going to find a way to win this one. So now Seattle going into the next game at 4-3. They're almost at the 500 mark. Not a loss you want to take. They're going against the Buffalo Bills at home. And this would be a game you think Josh Allen, the Bills, they have been one of the best teams in the NFL for 4 or 5 years. They've still got Josh Allen, prime of his career. This could be a really dangerous game. And I think it will be because Josh Allen, regardless of who's around him, he's that kind of a dynamic playmaker, and his running ability creates problems. But being back at Lumen Field and the fact that the Bills are trying to replace almost their entire receiving core, They're trying to replace most of their secondary on defense. This is still early enough in the season, too, that I think there's going to be some growing pains for the Buffalo Bills. I think this is a game where there's a lot of points scored, especially at this stage of the season. Still likely to have decent weather at Lumen Field. So I think there's going to be a lot of points, but for me, the difference maker, I actually think the Seahawks defense is going to be the group that steps up in this one late. And I think they're going to find ways to get to Josh Allen, who can throw interceptions. I think he's going to throw a pick in this game late. I've got the Seahawks stealing this one 33-26 to get back in the win column after losing their past 2 games. And the Seahawks get the benefit. They play 6 of their first 9 games at home. The last one in that stretch, the Los Angeles Rams. And I think the Rams are going to be a good team, but I'm wondering if a tougher schedule this year might make it a little more difficult for them to equal the success they had last year. And Seattle is going to be hungry to beat them. They lost both games to the Rams last year in close contests where they just couldn't put anything together in the second half on offense in either one of those games. I look at this matchup. There's no Aaron Donald. Yes, the Rams drafted some really good defensive linemen. They're trying to retool that group, but not having 99 out there is going to make things a little easier for the Seahawks on offense. And I think this would be a little lower scoring game. Both the games last year were when these teams got together. I see the Seahawks narrowly winning this one with a late field goal, 23-21 over the Rams. So they're getting out of this first 9-game stretch going into their bye with a 6-3 record. If that happens in reality, the Seahawks are going to be feeling pretty solid about their situation. And yet, once we get out of the bye week, you're going to see why 6-3, you might be happy that you got those wins and you're wondering what could have been if you would have beat the Atlanta Falcons on the road, because things are going to get much more difficult. And that starts in week 11 on the road, San Francisco 49ers. The Seahawks have some advantages here. They're going to be coming off a bye week, playing the 49ers at Levi Stadium, so they should be recharged. They have given the 49ers fits for a half the last couple times they've played in San Francisco, but they just have not been able to finish games. And unfortunately, even coming off the bye week, this is a game that is going to be really difficult for the Seattle Seahawks. And I think it's going to be one of those that is really close till the fourth quarter. And then San Francisco is going to throw a few punches, including a Deebo Samuel touchdown. He always seems to score against the Seahawks. And I think this ends up being a backbreaker. The offense has an a red zone interception from Geno Smith as well. That has been a blueprint in these games to begin with. And I see the Seahawks being more competitive, but I just think at the end of the day that the 49ers, they are just the better team. So Seahawks fans hoping to get go on. Can't happen, but in my predictions here, I think the 49ers are still the class of the NFC West. The Seahawks dropped to 6-4. And our last game here in the middle part of the season, a home contest, week 12, Arizona Cardinals, who I think are going to be one of the more improved teams in the NFL. I thought they had an excellent draft. They made some really savvy moves in free agency to add to this football team. And you're going to have to deal with Marvin Harrison Jr., who has a chance to be a star right out of the gate, catching passes from Kyler Murray. That's going to make this a team that's going to be a difficult contest both times the Seahawks and Cardinals get together. I think at this stage, though, week 12, I would feel more comfortable with Seattle's overall roster. Arizona is still trying to build their defense. They're still trying to build pieces on offense. If Seattle can slow down the run game, that is going to be the key. They didn't do that in either game against the Cardinals last year. If they can play better against the run and force Kyler Murray to beat him, even with the new stud receiver he's got, I like the Seahawks' chances to win this one at home in a tight one. I think it's going to be a close game. They always are when these teams get together, but 7th win of the season, 25-20 over the Cardinals, and they will get to see each other here again in a few weeks when we continue our game-by-game prediction. And those are always tricky when you play a team with that quick of a turnaround a second time. But Seattle in this prediction gets the victory. Can they do it at Arizona in a couple weeks? We'll just have to wait and see when I continue my predictions. That'll be coming up next. We'll be looking at weeks 13 through 18. Some really difficult road games for the Seahawks to close out the season. In fact, they're going to have 4 road games in their final 6. So maybe they're going to be really grateful they got that 6-3 start in this projection. We'll be looking at those last 6 games and wrapping up our game-by-game predictions coming up next here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our friends at FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Do you think Connor McDavid is going to get a hat trick against the Canucks? Is Aaron Judge going to stay red hot to hit another home run against the Twins? Will Anthony Edwards rise to the occasion in an elimination game and score 20 or more points against the Nuggets? You can bet on it all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You're listening to the Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to each and every one of the 12s tuning in. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. As I do each and every year, right after the schedule comes out, I like to look at all 17 games, a little bit of a breakdown on each one of those contests, and then make a way too early prediction. Though, as I said, the rosters are pretty much set in stone. This is how I feel about the way things are shaking up. There's obviously time for injuries. You hope those don't happen. But where we're at right now here in mid-May, predictions for the Seahawks. Right now going into the last 6 games of the season, I have the Seahawks with a 7-4 record. They are right on the cusp of getting a playoff spot in this prediction. But the 49ers have a 2-game lead. It's really 3 because they swept the Seahawks, but they have a lead over the Seahawks in the NFC West. Seattle's looking to get a wild card. So this could be really interesting. Let's get to the last 6 games, shall we? And week 13, this is maybe one of my 3 most anticipated games just because it's an old nemesis from the Green Bay Packers, now playing for the New York Jets. Aaron Rodgers, he is going to be wanting to have revenge against the entire rest of the NFL this year because he played 4 snaps last season before snapping his Achilles tendon. He missed the rest of the year. He wants to show people at 40 years of age that he still is an elite quarterback and that he can take the Jets to the postseason and deep into the postseason. The Jets haven't been to the playoffs in a long time. I think as long as Aaron Rodgers is healthy, this is going to be a game between 2 teams fighting for a playoff spot. The Jets might be in the driver's seat in the AFC East, with the Bills losing some quality players. Miami will have to wait and see just how good they really are, but the Jets expect to be in the hunt there. But this is a matchup. I like the Seahawks against the Jets because I feel like even though New York's got a lot of talent on defense, this is a team that still has a very shaky offensive line. And I think the Seahawks, with this aggressive defense they're going to have with Mike Macdonald, Aaron Rodgers and his gang, they're going to get some plays. They're going to score some points. But I think in the second half of this game, and Seattle's always played well in the Meadowlands, I think that the Seahawks are going to be able to get some turnovers on the Jets. Breece Hall's had some ball security issues at times. I feel like there's going to be a fumble. Jets are going to end up coughing the game up that they were ahead at halftime, and the Seahawks are going to find a way to sneak this out at the end. I just think the Seahawks have a better roster. This is one of those that matches up really well for the Seahawks, whereas I feel like the Falcons, that matchup, dealing with Kyle Pitts and some of the weapons they have, I'm not as optimistic about. But I actually like how the Seahawks match up with the New York Jets. So I have them getting the critical win to go to 8-4. Now we go back to week 14. And the reason I'm saying going back, because this is an opponent the Seahawks just played at home in week 12, the Arizona Cardinals, as I've mentioned a couple times already on this show. I think Arizona is going to be a team that nobody wants to play. I don't know if it ends up translating to a bunch of wins. I don't see them being a playoff team, but I think Arizona is going to be very competitive. Late last year, they gave teams fits, and they beat the Eagles late in the season. This is a team that looks to be on the ascent, and so I don't see the Seahawks sweeping them this year. And they're going to Arizona, the house of horrors that is State Farm Stadium. That is a place Seattle has had issues with injuries. They've had problems as of late stopping the run. And I just think this is a game where going on the road, Arizona being an improving team, I just can't see them beating them twice in 3 weeks. I think the Cardinals have enough weapons now at the receiver position with the run game and a lot of extra assets they've added on defense. It should be a much better defense than they had a year ago. I just can't see the Seahawks getting it done 2 times in 3 weeks against them. So Arizona gets the 26-17 win. I just think the offense is going to have some issues. And last year they were pretty inconsistent in Arizona, that season finale, even though they won the game. I just don't see this being a situation Seattle is going to be able to get out of both games against Arizona with a win. Last 2 home games of the season now coming up. Week 15, Green Bay Packers coming to town, Sunday Night Football. Josh Jacobs joining that Packers offense, I think, is going to be a really big addition for them. They made some key additions in the draft on defense as well. I think Green Bay is a sleeper to watch in the NFC. And this is really a game between 2 evenly matched teams. I would have Green Bay and Seattle probably in that same tier as teams that, if everything falls right, they could be much more dangerous than anticipated. I could also see a situation where they're struggling to make the playoffs. And so these are teams you can roll the dice on a little bit in that regard. And so they're going up against each other. Both are going to be in the playoff hunt in this prediction. Seattle coming in with 8 wins, 5 losses. I think they get to 9 wins in this game. And the reason why I still look at Green Bay's defense, and I think there's enough holes there that the Seahawks should be able to have some success throwing the football. I think the pass protection is going to be able to hold up against Green Bay's front line. And I think the Seahawks are going to be able to do just enough to slow down Josh Jacobs. And a passing game that is improving but is not elite for the Green Bay Packers. I think it's a close game, but Jake Bobo is going to get a touchdown just as he did in the preseason against Green Bay a year ago. And I think that ends up being the difference. Seattle gets the 27-23 win, a 9th victory, putting them right on the doorstep of clinching a playoff spot. The following week, another NFC North matchup at Lumen Field, the Minnesota Vikings, and this is the ultimate trap game. I think Minnesota, it's going to be a slow rebuild this year, and maybe even just a reset. They've got a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, but J.J. McCarthy being drafted in the first round, Kirk Cousins gone. McCarthy has a lot of talent. He has a lot of potential. He's probably going to be starting at this point instead of Sam Darnold. If he isn't the starter at the beginning of the season, we'll have to see how that ends up playing out. But regardless of who's playing the quarterback spot, you're either going to have a rookie or a veteran that has really struggled to live up to his first-round billing in Sam Darnold. The Vikings have some question marks in the offensive line. They have some question marks in the run game. There's some holes on defense. I just think at this stage, the Seahawks are going to be smelling the playoff blood in the water, and they're going to be saying, hey, let's get that 10th win. I just don't think Minnesota is going to be able to get the job done in this game. 20-10, I think it's going to be a little closer than maybe some anticipate with the Vikings, who I view them as the last place team in the NFC North. But Seattle gets the 20-10 win with a few big plays in the passing game in the second half to fend off the feisty Vikings. And with that 10th win, they clinch a playoff spot. They didn't get to 10 wins the last 2 years. They do so in this projection. And now we go to the last 2 games. And I think this is where the schedule is going to be really tricky for the Seattle Seahawks. They finished with 2 road games, one of them being a Thursday night game on the road in Chicago on December 26th. That just sounds like a nightmare to me for a team that isn't used to playing in sub 32-degree weather. Now we'll see. Maybe it'll be mild weather in late December. Sometimes that happens in Chicago, but there's also a very good chance you could have snowballs hitting in the helmet. You could have 20-degree temperatures or cooler. Maybe you're even in the single digits or below 0. We've seen that with these Midwest teams that play in outdoor stadiums. Swirling wind. If that ends up happening, neither one of these teams is going to be able to have much traction throwing the football, and it's going to really boil down to the run games. And you would think on paper that the Seahawks have the better run game, but I actually like what the Chicago Bears are building on their offensive line, having that home field advantage. This is that trap game that goes the wrong direction for the Seattle Seahawks. I just think Thursday night, December 26th, playing in Chicago, likely going to have frigid conditions, windy conditions, chance of potentially having snow at that stage of the season. I just don't see this being a great matchup for the Seahawks. And I think Chicago Bears have a chance to be a playoff team with Caleb Williams as their new quarterback because they won 7 games a year ago. There's some good young talent on both sides of the ball. Rome Odunze being added at the same time. I think this is going to be a low-scoring affair in part because the weather. I'm anticipating in this prediction there's going to be some nasty weather, but that ends up dropping the Seahawks to 10-6 on the season. They still have a playoff spot, but that is a big loss because it eliminates them from the NFC West championship. They're not going to be able to win a title, a division title, going into the finale. And when I do these predictions, I try to predict games for all 32 teams to try to get to a position where I can see what's going to happen in week 18. And in this case, the Seahawks with a 10-6 record, they are not going to be able to change their standing in the wild card. They are going to be the 6th seed with this prediction. They won't fall to 7th no matter what happens. They can't go up to 5th no matter what happens. So in week 18 against the Rams, we get Sam Howell's debut. Geno Smith sits, some other starters sit to get ready for the wild card round where the Seahawks are going to be the number 6 seed. The Rams, on the other hand, actually have one less win going into this game. And in order to get the 7th seed, they have to beat the Seahawks. So they are playing their starters if that scenario plays out. I like Sam Howell. I like some of the pieces Seattle is going to be playing in a game like this, but the Rams are going to be going all in. They're going to have their starters out there. I think Seattle keeps it close because Sam Howell is a really good backup, and they've got some other pieces he's going to be able to throw to. Still run the football some. It's an NFC West matchup. These games are always tight, it feels like. But I think the Rams playing their starters, they clinched that 7th spot, the final wild card, with a 30-22 win over the Seahawks. And so Seattle in this prediction goes 10-7. They get the 6th seed as a wild card. That is about where I could see this team being at, that 9-11 win range. I don't see them getting 12 or more victories. I don't see things bottoming out unless they have a ton of injuries, which that can happen to any team in the NFL. But I don't see this being a team that bottoms out and starts winning 5 or 6 games either. I look at the first half, having 6 home games in the first 9. Getting off to a fast start is going to be crucial because of that gauntlet at the end of the season with 4 road games in the final 6, having to play in chilly Chicago in prime time. Their home games, they have to play the Packers in prime time, and I think Green Bay is going to have a good team. So it is not going to be a cakewalk. First part of the season is going to be key for the Seahawks, but I think if they can take advantage of all those home games and get that big win over the Lions, or if they somehow beat the 49ers, get at least one win in primetime against those really good teams in the NFC, then the Seahawks should feel pretty good about their chances of being able to get to the postseason. I just don't think they're quite ready to compete for an NFC West title. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up on Blue Friday, we're going to continue to dive into the schedule. Nick Lee and I'll be looking at the 5 most anticipated games for the Seahawks going to next season. And we'll also have Blue Friday game day with some extra juicy predictions that are schedule based. Make sure that you are listening into the show. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and thanks for tuning in. Go Hawks.